Research on relationship formation reveals a consistent pattern. The way you manage being alone predicts how you will manage being together. Not perfectly, but predictably. Because the psychological patterns you develop in one context carry into the next context. Tashiro's research on compatibility shows that people tend to seek partners who match their existing patterns rather than partners who would help them grow. The person who has become comfortable with complete autonomy seeks partners who will not challenge that autonomy. The person who has avoided intimacy seeks partners who feel emotionally safe, which often means emotionally distant. The transition from singleness to partnership requires conscious effort. The autonomy that felt liberating during singleness can feel threatened in partnership. The privacy that provided safety can feel like walls, preventing connection. The self-sufficiency that was survival strategy can become inability to be vulnerable and ask for help. Perel's work on desire in long-term relationships emphasizes that maintaining desire requires maintaining some separatines, even within partnership. But the person coming from years of complete separation might have too much distance rather than too little. Finding the balance requires recalibration. Sexual compatibility is not primarily about matching specific behaviors or preferences. Research from the Kinsey Institute and others shows that sexual satisfaction in partnerships correlates most strongly with communication, responsiveness to feedback, and willingness to prioritize partner's pleasure alongside your own. The person who has spent years managing sexuality independently has developed patterns around their own pleasure. Partnered sexuality requires attention to someone else's pleasure equally. This is not sacrifice. This is the difference between solo and partnered sexuality. Both involve pleasure, but the focus differs. People who can communicate about sexuality, who can express desires and boundaries clearly, who can hear feedback without defensiveness, report higher sexual satisfaction in partnerships. These communication skills can be developed during singleness, or they can be neglected. How you approach your own sexuality during singleness shapes whether you develop these skills. Remember, the attachment research from earlier. Your attachment style affects how you experience singleness and how you approach partnership. But attachment is not destiny. Research shows that attachment styles can shift with conscious effort in new relationship experiences. The anxiously attached person who has struggled with singleness can use that struggle as information. What do I need to develop internally so that my well-being is not entirely dependent on having a partner? What would make me more secure? The avoidantly attached person who has been comfortable in singleness can examine whether the comfort is genuine preference or fear of intimacy. Would I actually want partnership if I could trust that it would not engulf me? What boundaries would make partnership feel safe? Secure attachment is not about never needing others. IT is about being able to need others, while also being able to stand alone. It is the integration of connection and autonomy rather than the elimination of one for the other. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts. What he meant was that interpretation shapes experience more than facts shape experience. Two people can have identical circumstances and completely different levels of well-being based on how they think about those circumstances. This applies profoundly to sexuality and singleness. The person who thinks their singleness means they are undesirable will suffer. The person who thinks their singleness means they have not yet met a compatible partner will experience the same circumstance differently. The facts are identical. The suffering varies based on interpretation. Friedrich Nietzsche emphasized that we should become who we are rather than who others expect us to be. Singleness provides opportunity for that becoming. Partnership provides different opportunities. Neither is superior. Both are stages in human development that serve different purposes. The question is not whether you are single or partnered. The question is whether you are using your current circumstance to develop into a more complete version of yourself, or whether you are passively waiting for circumstances to change while developing nothing. Here is the final question that research cannot answer, but that determines everything. Have you integrated your experience? Do you understand why you are single if you are single? Do you understand what you need to develop to be ready for partnership if that is what you want? Have you done that development? Or are you waiting? Waiting for the right person to appear? Waiting for circumstances to shift? Waiting for life to begin? Because life is not waiting. Life is happening right now. And the waiting is the life you are living. Carl Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. That becoming happens whether you are single or partnered, but it requires engagement with your actual circumstances, rather than fantasy about different circumstances. For single people, that means acknowledging sexuality as part of being human. It means finding ways to meet connection needs through friendship and community. IT means developing SELF knowledge about what you actually want, rather than what you think you should want. IT means using the autonomy of singleness to become someone worthy of the partnership you eventually seek. For everyone, IT means recognizing that relationship status is one variable among many that affect well-being. IT is not the only variable. IT is not even the most important variable for many people. Meaning, purpose, social, connection, physical health. So these often matter more than whether you have a romantic partner. Here's what the research consistently shows. Humans are resilient. We adapt to circumstances. We find ways to meet needs, even when the obvious solution is not available. Single people are not universally suffering. Partnered people are not universally thriving. The variation within each category exceeds the difference between categories. What matters is the quality of your engagement with your actual life. Are you building connection where you can? Are you maintaining physical health? Are you pursuing meaning? Are you developing? Are you treating yourself and others with respect? These questions apply whether you are single or partnered. They apply whether you are male or female. They apply regardless of age, culture, or circumstance. They are the questions that determine human flourishing. The research on singleness and sexuality reveals something important. You are not broken for being single. You are not deficient for having sexual needs. You are not abnormal for finding creative ways to meet those needs. You are human, and human means navigating the tension between biological drives and social circumstances as best you can. This is male psyche. We examine the research that others ignore. We ask the questions that make people uncomfortable. And we trust you to think critically about what you discover. If this challenged your assumptions, good. Assumptions deserve challenging. If this provided framework for understanding your own experience or the experience of others, better. Understanding is the foundation for growth. The research is clear. Singleness is not the problem. How you respond to singleness determines whether IT becomes opportunity or obstacle. And that response is within your control. Subscribe for more psychology that treats you like an adult capable of examining difficult questions. Share this with someone navigating these questions themselves. And most importantly, use what you have learned to build a life worth living, whether that life includes partnership or not. Loneliness research reveals something crucial. Loneliness is not the same as being alone. You can be lonely in a crowded room. You can be lonely in a partnership. And you can be alone without being lonely. Loneliness is the subjective experience of lacking meaningful connection, not the objective state of being without a partner. Dr. John Cacioppo spent his career studying loneliness. His research showed that chronic loneliness produces measurable health effects: increased inflammation, elevated stress hormones, weakened immune function, disrupted sleep. The effects are comparable to smoking in terms of health impact. This is not trivial. But here is what his research also showed. The cure for loneliness is not necessarily partnership. The cure is meaningful social connection. People with strong friendships, active communities, and regular social interaction do not experience chronic loneliness, even when single. The quality of connection matters more than the romantic status of the connections. Touch deprivation research adds another layer. Humans need physical touch for psychological well-being. Touch triggers oxytocin release, reduces cortisol, and provides nervous system regulation that words cannot provide. Extended absence of touch produces measurable effects on mood and stress levels. Tiffany Field's research at the Touch Research Institute documented that even non-romantic touch provides psychological benefits. Massage reduces anxiety. Hugging reduces stress hormones. Physical contact with friends and family provides some of the touch needs that humans require. It does not provide sexual touch, but it provides the broader category of physical connection that affects well-being. The implication is clear. Single people need to actively cultivate non-romantic physical touch. Friendships that include appropriate physical affection. Activities like massage or partner dance that provide touch in structured contexts. The absence of a romantic partner does not mean the absence of all touch if you build a life that includes it elsewhere. Carl Jung believed that periods of solitude provide opportunities for the process of becoming your full self rather than the self others expect you to be. Partnership requires compromise. It requires negotiating your preferences with someone else's preferences. Singleness removes that negotiation. For some people, extended singleness becomes the period where they finally figure out who they actually are. What they actually want. What actually produces satisfaction versus what they thought should produce satisfaction. The freedom from relationship obligation creates space for self-discovery that partnership might have prevented. This is not argument that everyone should be single. This is recognition that singleness provides specific opportunities that partnership does not, and people who use those opportunities emerge from singleness with clearer self knowledge than they had entering. IT research on sexual self-schema supports this. Sexual self-schema is your understanding of yourself as a sexual being. People with clear sexual self-schema who understand their desires, boundaries, and what produces satisfaction report higher sexual satisfaction across all relationship contexts. Solo sexuality during singleness can build that self knowledge in ways that some people never develop, even within partnerships. But here's what research also reveals. Extended singleness produces adaptations, and those adaptations do not automatically reverse when partnership becomes available. This is not judgment. This is a documented pattern that deserves acknowledgement. People who've been single for years adapt to being alone. They develop routines built around solo living. They develop independence in ways partnered people might not develop. They become accustomed to complete autonomy over decisions, schedules, and lifestyle. When partnership becomes available, those adaptations can create friction. The person who has managed their sexuality independently for years might struggle to integrate partnered sexuality, not because they lack desire, but because the patterns established alone require conscious effort to change. Research on habit formation shows that behaviors repeated consistently become automatic. The person whose sexual patterns have been solo for years has built neural pathways around solo sexuality. Partnered sexuality requires building different pathways. IT is not impossible, but IT is not automatic either. The same applies to autonomy. The person who has made every decision independently for years might find the negotiation and compromise of partnership genuinely difficult, even when they want partnership. The difficulty is not character flaw. IT is the predictable result of years of adaptation to singleness. Research across multiple studies identifies consistent predictors of well-being during singleness. These are not moral judgments. These are statistical correlations that help understand what matters. Autonomy of choice. People who are single by choice report higher well-being than people who are single due to circumstance. The autonomy matters. Wanting to be single produces different psychological outcomes than wanting partnership but being unable to achieve IT social connection quality. People with strong friendships and community connections thrive in singleness. People who are socially isolated struggle regardless of whether romantic partnership exists. The relationship status is less important than the overall quality of social bonds. Meaningful activity. People engaged in work, hobbies, creative pursuits, or a service that provides meaning report higher well-being. The meaning matters more than the relationship status. Purpose is protective. People comfortable with their sexuality, however they express it, report better outcomes than people experiencing shame or conflict about their sexual needs. The acceptance matters more than specific behaviors. Physical health maintenance. People who maintain physical health through exercise, nutrition, and sleep have better psychological outcomes during singleness. The physical foundation supports psychological well-being. These predictors work independently of relationship status. They predict well-being for both single and partnered people. But for single people, they become especially important because partnership is not providing connection, meaning, or validation that might mask deficits in these areas. Jordan Peterson emphasizes that you should fix yourself before trying to fix the world. The principle applies here. Before evaluating others for their singleness or their management of IT, examine your own relationship to sexuality and connection. Are you comfortable with your own sexuality? Can you experience sexual satisfaction independently? Do you understand your own desires and boundaries? Or do you need a partner to feel sexually valid? Can you be alone without being lonely? Have you built friendships and community that provide connection? Or is romantic partnership your only source of meaningful connection? Are you single by autonomous choice or by circumstance you want to change? If by circumstance, what are you doing to change it? And if your efforts are not working, have you examined whether your approach might be the problem rather than the availability of partners? These questions apply to everyone, single or partnered, male or female. The goal is not to judge others, but to understand yourself. In the final segment, we will examine what this means for building healthy relationships when partnership does become available, how the way you manage singleness affects the partnerships you form, and what research reveals about transitioning from autonomy to partnership in ways that actually work. The data on masturbation and psychological health is remarkably consistent, and it contradicts most of the cultural messaging around the topic. Research from the National Survey of Sexual Health and Behavior one of the largest studies of American sexual behavior, found that masturbation is nearly universal. Over 90% of men and over 70% of women report having masturbated in frequency. Does not correlate with relationship distress or psychological problems. In fact, the research suggests the opposite. People who are comfortable with their own sexuality, who understand their own bodies, who can achieve sexual satisfaction independently, report higher overall sexual satisfaction even when they do enter partnerships. The skill of understanding your own sexuality transfers. IT does not detract. This challenges the narrative that self-pleasure is a poor substitute for partnered sexuality. The research shows they serve different functions. Partnered sexuality provides connection, intimacy, validation, and shared experience. Solo sexuality provides self knowledge, stress relief, and autonomy. Both have value. Neither is superior in all contexts. Nagoski's work emphasizes this point. She found that women who understand their own sexual response, who know what produces pleasure for them, experienced higher sexual satisfaction in partnerships. The self-knowledge developed through solo exploration becomes an asset rather than a liability. The same principle applies across genders. Here's where the data gets interesting. The assumption is that partnered people must have higher sexual satisfaction than single people. Access to a partner should mean more sex, and therefore more satisfaction. But the research does not support this assumption in the straightforward way people expect. Studies on sexual satisfaction reveal that frequency of sex does not directly correlate with happiness. What correlates with happiness is sexual satisfaction, the subjective experience of whether your sexual life meets your needs and desires. And single people report varying levels of sexual satisfaction just like partnered people do. Some single people report high sexual satisfaction through solo sexuality and occasional casual encounters. Some partnered people report low sexual satisfaction despite regular access to a partner. Matters more than the relationship status of the people having IT. Research by Dr. Vrangalova on casual sex provides nuance here. She found that people who engage in casual sexual encounters for autonomous reasons, because they want to, because it aligns with their values, report positive outcomes. People who engage in casual sex for non-autonomous reasons, social pressure, hoping it will lead to relationship, avoiding loneliness, report negative outcomes. The motivation matters more than the behavior. Autonomous sexuality, whether solo or casual or partnered, correlates with well-being. Non-autonomous sexuality, doing things you do not actually want to do, correlates with distress. Relationship status is less predictive than autonomy. Carl Jung emphasized that humans are meaning-making creatures. We do not just experience events, we interpret them. The interpretation determines the psychological impact more than the event itself. Two people can experience the same objective circumstance and have completely different psychological responses based on the meaning they construct around it. This is profoundly true for sexuality and singleness. The person who interprets their singleness as temporary circumstance, as freedom, or as intentional choice experiences it differently than the person who interprets singleness as rejection, as failure, or as punishment. Research on sexual shame from Brian Brown and others confirms this. Sexual shame, the belief that your sexuality is wrong or shameful, produces negative psychological outcomes regardless of actual sexual behavior. People experiencing shame around masturbation report lower well-being, even though the behavior itself is psychologically neutral. The shame is the problem, not the behavior. Religious and philosophical frameworks provide meaning structures that some people find helpful. The person who interprets celibacy as spiritual discipline experiences abstinence differently than the person who interprets it as deprivation. The framework converts the same objective circumstance into completely different subjective experiences. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events. What he meant was that the interpretation you applied to circumstances matters more than the circumstances themselves. The single person who frames their situation as opportunity for self-development will have different psychological outcomes than the single person who frames the identical situation as social failure. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, provides crucial insight into how people experience singleness differently. Attachment styles, formed in early childhood, shape how adults approach relationships and how they experience being outside relationships. Secure attachment means you are comfortable with both intimacy and autonomy. You can be close to others without losing yourself. You can be alone without feeling abandoned. Securely attached people tend to experience singleness as neutral or positive. They enjoy connection when available and enjoy autonomy when alone. Anxious attachment means you crave closeness and fear abandonment. You need constant reassurance from partners. For anxiously attached people, singleness is genuinely distressing. The absence of a partner triggers deep fears. Managing sexuality becomes secondary to the overwhelming discomfort of being alone. Avoidant attachment means you prioritize autonomy and fear engulfment. You keep emotional distance, even in partnerships. For avoidantly attached people, singleness might feel safer than partnership. Sexuality can be managed through casual encounters or solo activity without the discomfort of emotional intimacy. Understanding your attachment style helps you understand your own response to singleness. The anxiously attached person is not weak for struggling with being alone. Avoidantly attached person is not cold for preferring it. These are predictable patterns that attachment research has identified and validated across cultures. Research consistently shows that men and women experience sexuality and singleness with more overlap than difference. Yes, hormonal profiles differentes, cultural socialization differs, but the fundamental psychological experience, managing biological drives while navigating social circumstances, is human rather than gendered. Studies on male sexuality reveal that men also experience wide variation in desire, in how they manage singleness, and what produces sexual satisfaction. The stereotype of universally high-drive men constantly seeking sex does not match research on actual male sexual experience. Similarly, research on female sexuality reveals that women experience spontaneous desire, pur casual, sex for autonomous reasons, and report sexual satisfaction through solo sexuality at rates that contradict traditional gender narratives. The variation within each gender exceeds the average differences between genders. What this means is that examining singleness and sexuality as though it is fundamentally different for men versus women misses the point. The meaningful differences are between individuals based on desire level, attachment style, values, and life circumstances. Gender explains less variation than psychology does. In the next segment, We are going to examine the actual challenges that research identifies. Not speculation about private behavior, but the documented psychological patterns that emerge when people spend extended time outside partnership. The loneliness research, the touch deprivation studies, and the surprising findings about what actually predicts whether someone will thrive or struggle during periods of singleness. Here's a question that rarely gets examined honestly. What happens to human sexuality when there is nitrogen monoxide partner to share it with? Not the idealized version, where people patiently wait in perfect contentment. The actual psychological and biological reality that millions of adults navigate every day. The question matters because the numbers are staggering. According to Pew Research, nearly half of adults in the United States are single. That is not a small minority. That is a massive portion of the population managing sexuality, connection needs, and intimacy outside the framework of partnership. And yet the conversation about how this actually works remains remarkably shallow. The cultural narrative suggests that single people are either desperately seeking partnership or perfectly content in solitude. The reality is far more complex. Human beings are social creatures. We evolved for connection. We evolved for touch. We evolve with sexual drives that do not disappear simply because circumstances make partnership difficult to achieve or maintain. Carl Jung understood that human psychology operates on multiple levels simultaneously. The conscious self, the one we present to the world, often conflicts with deeper drives that operate beneath awareness. He wrote about the tension between what we believe we should be and what we actually are. And nowhere is this tension more visible than in how people manage fundamental biological drives when social circumstances do not provide the typical outlet. This is male psyche. And today we are examining what research actually reveals about singleness, sexuality, and human well-being. Not speculation. Not assumptions about what people do in private, but what science tells us about how humans navigate connection and autonomy when partnership is not part of their current reality. Before we go further, we need to establish what the data actually shows. Because the cultural narratives about singleness are often wrong, and operating from wrong assumptions leads to wrong conclusions about yourself or about others. Dr. Bella DePaulo has spent decades researching single people. Her work challenges nearly every stereotype. She found that single people are not universally miserable, desperately seeking partnership, or psychologically damaged. Many single people report high life satisfaction. Many prefer their current state. Many have chosen singleness deliberately after experiencing partnership and deciding was not worth the trade-off. This matters because it establishes the first critical point. Singleness is not automatically a problem to be solved. For many people, it is a valid life state that provides benefits partnership would not provide. Autonomy, freedom, time, energy. The ability to build a life according to internal preferences rather than negotiated compromise. But here is where IT gets complicated. Even people who prefer singleness still have biological drives. Sexual desire does not require romantic partnership to exist. The need for physical touch, for intimacy, for sexual expression. These needs persist regardless of relationship status, and managing them requires strategies that research is only beginning to examine honestly. Sigmund Freud was wrong about many things, but he was right about this. Sexual drive is fundamental to human psychology. IT is not optional equipment. IT is built into the operating system. And when fundamental drives go unmet, they produce effects. The effects are not purely psychological. They are physiological. Sexual activity triggers the release of oxytocin, dopamine, and endorphins. These neurochemicals regulate mood, stress response, and overall well-being. Regular sexual activity, whether partnered or solo, produces different baseline N, IU, R, OC, HEM, ISDR, even extended abstinence. This is not moral judgment. This is biology. The brain responds to sexual activity by releasing chemicals that affect how you feel. The absence of those chemical releases produces deflating, emotional basiliness. Research from the Kinsey Institute confirms that sexual frequency correlates with self-reported well-being, though the relationship is complex and bidirectional. But here's what the research does not show. IT does not show that partnered sex is the only way to achieve these benefits. IT does not show that single people are automatically suffering. IT does not show that sexual activity is required for happiness. What IT shows is that sexuality and well-being are connected in ways that vary dramatically between individuals. Emily Nagoski revolutionized the understanding of human sexuality with her research on desire types. She identified that people fall into two broad categories: spontaneous desire and responsive desire. And spontaneous desire means you experience sexual wanting that arises independently. Responsive desire means sexual interest emerges in response to context, stimulation, or connection. This distinction matters enormously for understanding singleness. A person with high spontaneous desire experiences sexuality very differently than a person with low responsive desire. For the high spontaneous desire person, extended singleness creates tension that demands management. For the low responsive desire person, singleness might create nitrogen monoxide sexual tension at all. The variation is not gendered. Research from Meredith Shivers and others has shown that sexual desire patterns vary as much within genders as between them. The stereotype that men have high drive and women have low drive does not match the data. Both men and women show wide variation in desire levels, desire types, and how sexuality integrates with overall well-being. What this means is that talking about how single people manage sexuality as though there is a single answer is fundamentally wrong. The person with high spontaneous desire faces entirely different challenges than the person with low responsive desire. The strategies that work for one would be completely unnecessary or even counterproductive for the other. Arthur Schopenhauer wrote about what he called the porcupine dilemma. Porcupines need to huddle together for warmth in winter, but their quills prick each other when they get too close. So they are trapped between freezing in isolation and bleeding in intimacy. They must find the right distance. Close enough for warmth, far enough to avoid the quills. This is the human condition regarding connection and autonomy. We need both, but they exist in tension. Partnership provides connection at the cost of autonomy. Singleness provides autonomy at the cost of connection. Neither state is purely positive or purely negative. Both involve traits. Research on self-determination theory, developed by Deci and Ryan, identifies three fundamental human needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. All three are required for well-being. Partnership threatens autonomy while providing relatedness. Singleness provides autonomy while threatening relatedness. The challenge is finding ways to meet all three needs, regardless of relationship status. For single people, this means finding relatedness, the connection need outside romantic partnership, friendships, family, community. These provide some of the connection that humans require, but they do not provide physical intimacy or sexual expression. Those needs require different solutions. So we arrive at the actual question. How do people manage sexuality when partnership is not available? Not what should they do according to some moral framework. Not what we imagine they do. But what does research and honest observation reveal about the actual strategies people deploy? The answer's going to vary dramatically based on multiple factors. Desire level, desire type, personal values, religious or philosophical frameworks, past experiences with sexuality, current life circumstances, availability of alternatives to partnership. All of these variables interact to produce different solutions for different people. What we can examine are the categories of response that appear across populations, the broad patterns that research and observation reveal, not to judge them, not to prescribe them, but to understand the landscape of human experience when fundamental drives meet circumstantial realities. In the next segment, we are going to examine what research reveals about sexual well-being outside partnership, the studies on masturbation, sexual satisfaction, and psychological health, the data on what actually correlates with happiness and what does not, and the surprising findings about how relationship status connects to sexual satisfaction in ways the cultural narrative gets completely wrong. Because here is what the research consistently shows. The relationship between partnership and sexual satisfaction is not what most people assume. And understanding what the data actually reveals changes how we think about sexuality, connection, and human flourishing. This is Male Psyche. And we go where the research leads, not where assumptions take us.